So we're here at the house of my parents, and I am interested in hearing what my dad, Ian Flintoff, has to say about his experience in the army during national service, which is effectively conscription, which is something that is being spoken of quite a bit at the moment, that there's a possibility of conscription. So I'm interested to hear what your experiences were, what your experience was of conscription. So can you tell us how long was conscription, and when were you asked to join, to sign up? How old were you, and how long was it for?
It was a 2-year period, compulsorily, and the age you were called up was 18, though it could be postponed if you had a reason to postpone it. In my own case, it was rather interesting because I'd been given a scholarship to continue at university. But when I was awarded the open scholarship, the letter that came with it saying congratulations on the scholarship also said, but make sure you do your 2 years national service before you come to study. So in other words, I had to go to the army before that. But interestingly, from my own point of view, I'd been living and working in Paris immediately before that. So it was really just a matter of a few days from being on the left bank of Paris, and things like tourne, tourne, mes personnages, la terre tourne, to going into the army and stand by your beds, get up in the morning, come on. And when they were shouting that, of course, it was still dark because it was the end of the year when I was called up. And so I was going from the wonderful experiences of Paris to the army for 2 years. Everybody was compelled to join the army to do the 2 years national service. Some, as I say, did go to university beforehand, and you could get a deferment. So in other words, you did your university degree, and then you could go and do the army service afterwards. But in my case, the actual awarding of my open scholarship said in the letter, make sure you've done your military service first. So I was called up. I was living in Lancashire at the time with my parents, and so I was called up into the East Lancashire Regiment, which was then a military regiment. Of course, you wore khaki and you did this and that. And the first period, which they call basic training really was a way of learning how to kill people, how to march up and down, how to salute, and above all, how to press your trousers and polish your boots. So I did that for, I think it was a 10-week period of basic training with the East Lancashire Regiment. The basic training involved shooting with a rifle. You had a rifle, of course. You all had your individual rifle. The light machine gun, and I turned out to be a bit of a, though I say it myself, a bit of a crack shot with the LMG, the light machine gun. I think I could kill somebody, as I recall, a quarter of a mile away. You get down there and you shoot like that.
So can I just come in here? Can you actually kill people? Would you know how to kill me? If it came to it, could you just kill me now?
Well, I would be unwilling to do so for reasons of conscience and my own faith. But one of the other things that we were taught, which was quite hairy in a way, as I say, we had these rifles, and you could put a bayonet into the top of the rifle, as you've probably seen that before. And one of the things we were taught to do, you had sacks hanging up about that big, and they were to stand in for human beings. And then when you charged at the sack, you had to have the bayonet there, and you had to stick it in and scream at the top of your voice. Scream as loud as you could, because that was so that when you actually did it in reality, when you did, of course, they would scream. And so we were all 18-year-olds, were taught to kill people and scream at the same time. So I learned to shoot on the rifle, kill with the light machine gun, and stick bayonets into people. And scream at the same time. That was basic training. And then after the 10 weeks, you have what they call a passing out parade, which is very smart. You do all the soldiers shooting and everything like that. And then you become a qualified full-time soldier. And in our case, the East Lancashire Regiment, you get special medallions you put on your lapels here, and there was a special thing you put on the cap badge.
So you had 10 weeks, and
10
then
weeks.
What happened after that 10 weeks where you learned to kill people and stuff like that?
I thought at that time that I would be probably going to Germany, where the East Lancashire Regiment was based in the post-war period. Of course, they were there for many years afterwards. So I was prepared to go to Germany, but we did have a leave for Christmas So I was able to have a leave at Christmas and see my parents and see other friends. And then when I came back from the leave over Christmas to the barracks, which was an old Victorian barracks in North Preston, a place called Fulwood, when I came back to the barracks, there was a message for me saying I had to go to the War Office, which was what they then called the Ministry of Defence, and go to the War Office, and they had an interview.
Is this something that you should be telling me now? Could you be jailed for telling me this stuff?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. We all had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
So for 10 weeks you were trained how to kill people and press your trousers. Then they said, come and see us at the War Office. What was it they wanted you to do after the 10 weeks? Do you want to tell people that?
Well, at the War Office, they were very friendly, I have to say. They were very nice and friendly, and they took you into an office just on your own, and they chatted for a while about languages. I'd got a scholarship, as I say, to go to university to do French and Spanish, and they said they'd like me to do what was called the Russian course, which was learning Russian for intelligence purposes. That was to say, to get information, if you could, and translate it from Russian into English. And so we started from scratch. Quite a number of people, young 18-year-olds, who'd got some kind of language qualifications, and they were started to teach Russian. So I went to Bodmin in Cornwall, where I went into a hut, as I remember, and there was a very nice elderly, well, not too elderly, middle-aged Russian man standing by a fire. It was by this time January, so it was pretty cold, and he was standing there. And I've told this story many times, but probably never to yourself. As I was sitting there, I was the first one through the door of this wooden hut on Bodminton Moor, and as I went through the door, he said, "Здравствуйте, садитесь, пожалуйста." So I said, "Ian Flintoff," and he said, "No, садитесь, пожалуйста." So I thought his name was Садитесь, пожалуйста. But Садитесь, пожалуйста means sit down, please. But I didn't know that at the time, anyway. But I thought, let's just садитесь, пожалуйста, and I kept saying, "Ian Flintoff, Ian Flintoff. Садитесь, пожалуйста." So anyway, that was the beginning. And so we did time in Cornwall during the winter. And then there was also a JSSL, as they called it, Joint Services School of Linguists, which was in Scotland. And for a short time, I also went to Cambridge University at the Department of Slavonic Studies.
You were being asked to learn Russian in some way to become a spy, in a sense, because it was in the intelligence corps, wasn't it?
Well, I did finish up in the intelligence corps. They put it to us this way. This, in fact, now it's just come into my head. They said the problem during the First World War had been that there were just not enough people in the population who understood and spoke German. So they were making sure that they had a reserve of people who knew Russian fairly fluently. If there had been any kind of confrontation where it was important, that was probably where the draft would have gone. MI6, if I remember, is to collect information from the other side. MI5 is to protect the country from kind of, spying and espionage and so on. I don't think anything I was taught in the basic training, shooting with the rifle or the light machine gun or sticking the bayonet into a sack, I don't think, or polishing my boots or any much, I don't think any of it was of any value whatsoever. So if it came to the question, should we reintroduce national service, I would certainly have my doubts about bringing in military national service when there could be other forms of national service, for example, working for 2 years in a hospital, working for 2 years with the fire brigade, and my own favourite, and it's a little bit light-hearted, I'd like to see everybody do 2 years in live theatre, because if there's anything I've ever done which brings people together in the best sense equality, regardless of the colour of your skin, whatever sex you are, whatever age you are, when you're on stage with other people, you really are together in the most loving and caring way that I've ever discovered in my life.
What would your feeling be about people if you'd been conscripted to join a war?
Well, that's a very good question indeed. I mean, because I do remember I was born in Preston, in Hampshire, that there was a young man from Preston who was also doing his national service, who had to go and fight and was actually killed. So he was killed during his national service. And I do remember my mother, when she heard the news, being so miserably sad for the mother that she went round immediately to see the mother of this young man and the mother and father of the young man who'd been killed. So there were deaths of national servicemen in places like Korea, I think. But there was no formal war. I mean, I do remember, for example, I have a recollection of being on a train when we were in the Russian thing, and we were asking all of us together, is it likely that we're going to be called up and have to fight? The problem with the Russian thing, of course, was really, I'm not sure when the official Cold War started, but I think the Russian language teaching these young men Russian was to stand by for the Cold War rather than the expectation that there would be actually military attack and everything formal with Russia.
Right.
But there were national servicemen killed.
If you wanted to avoid conscription, if you wanted to avoid national service, do you know of people who tried to avoid it, and what happened if they did? What happened if you said, I don't want to sign
Well,
up?
of course, there were people who were what they called, quite rightly, conscientious objectors, and they were very brave people in a very different way, because they had to say quite categorically, I don't want to fight people, and I certainly don't want to kill people. So they were still called up, but they had to do duties which had nothing to do with fighting. Often they did social work or other work. Quakers, for example, were for centuries opposed to the idea of war completely. And so if you were a member of they call it officially the Society of Friends, Quaker, you had the right not to be called up, but you still had to do 2 years of service, but in a different way. So I had a friend actually who was a fellow student in my later years when I finished the national service and was studying at university, a young friend called Robin, who was also a Quaker, and he'd had to do 2 years service, but because of his conscience and his beliefs, he was allowed not to have to do service. Of course, in the First World War, even if you called that your reason, you would be shot at dawn. So it was a new thing for the Second World War that you had the right to be a conscientious objector. If you were to ask me, do I regret having done national service? I'd have to say, because of the Russian and the Russian people, I will emphasize that, the wonderful, lovely, courteous people, that no, I don't regret it, because it opened my mind very much to Russia, the Russian culture. We've had a good time in Moscow together, Deirdre, your mother and me. We went to see Richard III, Shakespeare's play, in Russian. And what was impressive when we were going into the theatre to see people swarming out of the offices and shops and everything else, pouring into this theatre to see an English dramatist doing a Russian version of Shakespeare's play. You know? Russia is a great country, a great culture, and has been since Peter the Great, for the last 300 or 400 years. They have contributed massively. The ballet, if you think about the ballet, the novel, Dostoevsky, I just mentioned, and Tolstoy, the poets, Lermontov and Pushkin and so on, massive contribution. And it just so happened that the 50 or so Russians I happened to meet during the military were people of enormous warmth. They're so welcoming and warm-hearted. I really love them. And the language, as I say, the language, I'm very happy about French and Spanish and a little bit of this and that, but Russian is a very beautiful language for various reasons to do with the sounds for every vowel sound you have 2 vowels, a hard vowel and a soft vowel for every consonant you have. So it's a very musical language, very beautiful.
Right, well, having said that, just wondering, would you be able to maybe give us any Russian, any Pushkin, any particular poet that you'd like to give us? I know people enjoyed your Shakespeare last time, so what about a bit of Russian poetry?
Yeah, this is Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin, and it's one of the most famous poems in Russian. In fact, I saw it recently referred to in another book, a novel, I think, somewhere. And it goes like this. Well, the first line means, I loved you once. And it goes on to say at the very end of the poem, I hope God will love you as much as I did. And it goes like this in Russian. Я вас любил. Любовь еще, быть может, в душе моей угасла не совсем. Но пусть она вас больше не тревожит. Я не хочу печалить вас ничем. Я вас любил так молвно, так надежно, то робостью, то милостью томим. Я вас любил так искренне, так нежно, как дай вам Бог, любимый быть другим.